Wait!
In the event that I'm called upon to form a government, I will present to Parliament the program of priorities that I outlined during the campaign.
I believe that we can marshal the human, material, and financial resources of this country to eradicate poverty, inequality, and insecurity.
We lost a government, and frankly, it was my fault.
You would get a new agreement, all right, but it would be worse than the one you have now. That would hurt employment in Canada and jobs. It would not help.
I appreciate your lecture, but you know, the Canada-U.S. trade deal has cost us over 400,000 jobs. That's a very high price to pay.
And you women are going to get mad at me out there. When you come to the games, keep your eyes on the puck. And I'm telling you, I've seen some awful smacks, and it's always a woman yapping away there.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Red Ensign Special. The Harvest is Past Part 1, The Return of Jason Kenney. Now, as those who have followed this podcast and more broadly Canadian politics may have noted, Canadian politics, prior to the start of this podcast, Canadian politics entered a mode in which many things seemed possible, ranging from the breakup of the country to build back better and an utterly totalitarian perma-lockdown kind of society. Woke North Korea, as Morgoth articulated it. That range of possibilities has radically narrowed as the years have gone on, to the point where we have very nearly returned to Canadian politics as I have known it most of my life. A field where the future is very determined, a field where possibilities seem very narrow, a field where ordinary citizens check out mentally because it's boring and there's nothing happening. We live in the Mark Carney Reich, and we expect to live in it for a long period. I want to do a series of videos examining how we got back here, whether it's durable, and how some of the various forces in Canadian politics are responding to that change in phase. The end of the crisis which began really in 2020 and did not end until the latter half, maybe the last quarter of 2025. And the first of these episodes that I want to do has to do with a figure that exited the stage because he was unsuitable for the political moment. That is Jason Kenney. Now, Jason Kenney is infamous as the Premier of Alberta during COVID. But I'm not the only one who has noticed his attempt to return to politics. This is Mark Nixon describing Jason Kenney's latest media blitz as the soft launch of his campaign to replace Pierre Poilievre as leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Those who follow Canadian politics know that Pierre Poilievre is in a very weak position in control of the CPC, that there are at least 3 or 4 figures trying to do him in as party leader, and it looks like Jason Kenney is trying to throw his hat in the ring as a potential replacement in what he anticipates to be an upcoming leadership election. Now, let's just refresh our memory as to who Jason Kenney is before we begin to look at his return to politics. Jason Kenney was the lockdown king of Alberta. He was the man responsible more than any other single individual for the fact that we had a totally unified response to COVID-19 across the country. There was one province most likely to take a different path. That was the province of Alberta, where the measures were the least popular and where there were the most people who made it difficult for the government to enforce the measures. Jason Kenney was iron-fisted in the way that he enforced public health doctrine, sending James Coates, Tim Stevens, Artur Pawlowski, and others to prison for extended periods of time, in the case of many of them to solitary confinement under the excuse that it was for the safety of the prison population from the virus, under charges of essentially mischief, and doing so in one of the most kind of optically totalitarian ways you could possibly imagine. Jason Kenney was also the first casualty of the truck convoy within a few days of the convoy arriving in Ottawa and the blockade at the Coutts border and at the border in southern Ontario. Jason Kenney was forced to resign by the Alberta elite who sponsored him. And in his resignation letter, he blamed the far right, the vengeful and ill anger and toxic cynicism, which often seek to tear things down rather than build up and improve our imperfect institutions. Right? This is who Jason Kenney is. Our imperfect institutions, the things that we need to build up. He is conservative with a small c and a representative of the Alberta elite in politics, for better and for worse. Now, how did Jason Kenney, after resigning as Premier of Alberta in disgrace, find his way back into Canadian politics? Well, after he resigned, Jason Kenney went into think tank world, because that's what you do if you're a member of the CPC who has resigned from a major position. And he made his return to public life by leading the campaign against the referendum for Alberta independence. So those who follow Canadian politics might be aware that because more than 100,000 signatures were collected in support on a petition in support of Alberta independence, of a plebiscite will occur in, I believe it's October of this year, on the question of whether Alberta ought to secede from Canada. That plebiscite is very likely to fail based on current polling information. Somewhere between 20 to 30% of decided voters want Alberta to leave Canada, and almost all voters report that they are decided on this issue. Jason Kenney decided that it was his role in life to jump to the front of the parade on what to him seemed like a very clear-cut winning political issue, that is, that Alberta should remain in Canada, and as it turns out, a very popular issue with almost the entire Canadian media and kind of opinion-making apparatus standing behind him, a very safe bet. And he has used this to re-inject himself into Canadian politics. I kind of enjoy this headline. Alberta separation issue draws powerful voice in Jason Kenney. All right. This is the kind of coverage that you need in order to rehabilitate a political career that was destroyed by your own incompetence. But it's interesting to see, now that the Alberta referendum issue looks kind of well in hand, and now that he has rebuilt himself as a political figure, the kinds of actions that Kenney is taking with aim kind of squarely at national rather than provincial politics. And one of the issues he has taken on is the issue of the restoration of statues, particularly the restoration or the destruction of statues of Canada's kind of founding heroes. Canada has two early prime ministers that are representative of the foundation of the country, Wilfrid Laurier and John A. Macdonald. John A. Macdonald has been aggressively targeted by the Canadian left for removal. Wilfrid Laurier has not, in part because Wilfrid Laurier was the first prime minister from the Liberal Party of Canada, and as such, he has a kind of halo. Now, Jason Kenney knows enough of Canadian history to understand that both John A. Macdonald and Wilfrid Laurier were men of the British Empire. Neither of them seriously believed that Canada was, should be, or ever would be an independent country, right? I appreciate that there is a myth of Macdonald that kind of goes around that he had a vision of a single country from sea to sea. This is a very biased retelling of Macdonald's story. He was a British imperialist, and he believed in the political formula of the British Empire, just like Wilfrid Laurier did. And a very important element of the formula, the political formula of the late British Empire in the 19th century, was the concept of the white man's burden. Right? It was not a racially egalitarian empire. It was not a culturally egalitarian empire. It believed that the British Empire had a civilizing mission that spanned the globe to bring Christian civilization to the four corners of the earth. And it believed that there were inherent inequalities between people of different racial backgrounds owing to their breeding. Right? If you read any significant 19th century British authors, you will find this all over their work. But Macdonald is probably a less out and out representative of this view than Laurier is. And so Jason Kenney goes through a comparative exercise and points out that by the standards of modern liberal progressive morality, Wilfrid Laurier is objectively more evil than John Macdonald. And so, therefore, the left trying to tear down statues of Macdonald are hypocrites and should, fail by their own standards. We can kind of review some of these. So Laurier massively expanded the residential school system. Laurier ignored the Bryce report, which detailed poor living conditions in residential schools and on reserves. Laurier massively increased the head tax on Chinese immigrants. Laurier signed an order in council prohibiting any immigrants belonging to the, quote, Negro race, which is deemed unsuitable. And apparently he had some trouble honoring Native American treaties with Native American tribes as well. So you can see here laying out the violations that Laurier had of liberal morality here, and he goes on to compare them to what he views as the less severe violations of that morality made by Macdonald, and says that essentially the Liberal Party are the real racists, and therefore you should tear down statues of Laurier rather than Macdonald. Away we go. Now, there's layers to how kind of crazy this is, but what I really want to highlight here is the mentality behind this approach to politics. So this approach to politics actually does gain some kind of minor status win for Jason Kenney, both in terms of kind of making his opponents look a little bit foolish, but also in terms of bringing him across as a moderate prepared to win an election in Canada as it stands today. It does so at the cost of reinforcing the moral frame of the progressive left in the country, reinforcing the idea that racism and the country's history are profound sins against the moral order, and that everybody agrees with that moral order. Really, that is the real gift that people like Kenney are giving to the progressive left here. They're, as a representative of the Conservative Party, reinforcing the morality of the progressive left, they are giving credence to the idea that everybody in the country buys in to that the morality of the progressive left and should be judged against it. It's also worth noting that Jason Kenney carries 3 flags in his bio: a Canadian flag, a Ukraine flag, and an Israeli flag, signaling his loyalty to all of the international projects of the global American empire. If you go back through his Twitter history during his period of time in think tank, he made it his personal mission to try to convince as many Canadians as possible that they should send as many dollars and as much support of whatever other kind to the international projects of the global American empire, presumably in preparation for the day he would re-enter federal politics, politics being especially concerned with foreign policy, and he would need to be considered a safe pair of hands to control Canada on an international stage. And you can see a similar set of comments here. So there's been a policy decision made by the Carney government to ban prayer from certain areas related to the military, Remembrance Day services, and so on. This has occurred in order to deprive the right of the spectacle of Sikh, Hindu, and Muslim prayers at Remembrance Day services, an obvious affront both to the veterans who are still living and to the history of this country. Something that would profoundly embarrass the Liberal Party. It's just a free propaganda win to the other side, so it's much easier for them to simply ban the practice outright and kind of double down on a Quebec-style enforced secularism. Jason Kenney knows all this, but sees that there's a real opportunity here to try to rebuild his credibility with the part of the base which he most infuriated during his time as Premier of Alberta, and talk about the importance of God in Canada's kind of historic, in Canada's history, and to the individuals who serve in the armed forces, past and present. He also knows that in the broader environment of the global American empire, Canada is in the doghouse for its treatment of religious minorities. The Trump administration has repeatedly raised the issue of the burning of churches in the country as an embarrassing point. He knows that reining some of this in, especially when Red America is in charge in the Imperial Center, is a valuable propaganda kind of perception management opportunity. And so you can see him curating his resume in order to be as strong as possible in a Conservative Party convention, to try to be the moderate option to return the Conservative Party of Canada to control of the federal government. We observe this knowing full well that if Jason Kenney comes into control of the federal government, he will reinforce the perception that progressive liberal morality is a complete consensus within the country, and continue to participate in the destruction of Canada as we have known and loved it. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope you learned something.
Canada originally was put together by two groups of people who didn't have much in common but didn't want to be American.
The line just popped into my head. A bunch of the boys was a-whooping it up. And there I got my start.
We have had a flag. Flags can be changed. But flags cannot be imposed, the sacred symbols of a people's hopes and aspirations, by the simple, capricious, personal choice of a Prime Minister of Canada.
I have watched this country for half of my life from abroad, and we have turned complacency into just that, a national sport.
I am resolutely opposed to all innovation, all change, but I am determined to understand what's happening. I don't choose just to sit and let the juggernaut roll over me.